Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Saturday, August 9th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside, the temperature will reach a high of 96.2 degrees Fahrenheit today, with a low of 69.0 degrees. Remember to stay cool and well hydrated, especially if you plan on being outdoors. Later in the show, we'll discuss the implications for Ukraine's sovereignty following a meeting between Trump and Putin. We'll also investigate the legal viability of the Trump administration's new tariffs, exploring whether they are likely to survive challenges in court. All these important stories and more are coming up next on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We're beginning our program with a diplomatic seismic shift that could reverberate across the globe. Just 6 days from now, a highly anticipated meeting is set to take place on what was once Russian soil, now American territory. For more on this pivotal summit, we turn to our seasoned news reporter, Ethan, who's been following the developments closely. Ethan, what can you tell us about this upcoming meeting that has everyone talking?
Grace, it's shaping up to be quite the event. As of today, August 9th, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump is scheduled to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday, August 15th. This summit, according to reporting from NPR, is primarily focused on discussing an end to Russia's war in Ukraine, which is now shockingly in its fourth year.
Alaska, a rather unconventional choice, isn't it? What's the significance of this location, and how did this meeting come to be?
Indeed, Grace, it's a symbolic choice, if you'll pardon the pun, a truly chilling new development. President Trump initially announced the meeting on social media, a detail confirmed by BBC News. A Kremlin spokesperson then validated it, calling Alaska quite logical, due to its proximity to Russia, as reported by BBC News. This will be the first time Trump and Putin have met since 2019 at the G20 in Osaka, Japan, and the first time a U.S. president has met Putin since Joe Biden did so in 2021 in Geneva, states NPR. For Putin, it's his first visit to U.S. soil in a decade, since a UN General Assembly meeting in New York back in September 2015. So, it's not just a meeting, it's a monumental return.
A monumental return, indeed. Now, the core of this discussion revolves around a proposed peace deal involving a, quote, swapping of territories. Can you elaborate on what exactly that entails and Ukraine's reaction to it?
This is where things get really contentious, Grace. According to Trump, as reported by NPR, The Guardian, and BBC News, the idea is a swapping of territories to the betterment of both Ukraine and Russia. While Trump hasn't offered specifics, BBC News, citing its U.S. partner CBS News and sources familiar with the discussions, indicates the White House is trying to persuade European leaders to accept a deal where Russia would retain the entire Donbas region and Crimea in exchange for relinquishing the partially occupied Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. The Wall Street Journal also reported that Putin had recently proposed a similar arrangement to Trump's envoy. The Guardian noted that Bloomberg described such a deal as potentially, quote, cementing some of Putin's territorial gains, essentially freezing the battle lines. But it's politically fraught for Ukraine, to say the least.
And how has Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky responded to what many are calling a politically explosive proposal?
He has drawn a very clear line in the sand, Grace. Zelensky has vehemently rejected any preconditions for territorial concessions. As reported by The Guardian and BBC News, he has firmly declared that Ukraine will not give up its land to occupiers, and that any decisions against us, any decisions without Ukraine, are also decisions against peace. He emphasized that the war cannot be ended without us, without Ukraine, asserting Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier, according to BBC News. However, he has expressed readiness to work with Trump for a real, and most importantly, lasting peace, as noted by BBC News. So while he's open to working with Trump, territorial integrity is non-negotiable for Kyiv.
That makes the question of Ukraine's direct participation in this summit all the more pressing. Will Zelensky be part of this high-stakes meeting?
That remains a very fluid situation, Grace. Ukrainian officials had previously hoped for a three-way meeting that would include Zelensky. However, the Kremlin, through aide Yuri Ushakov, confirmed the bilateral meeting with Trump, but ignored the suggestion from U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff for a trilateral summit, according to The Guardian. Putin himself stated he is not ready to meet Zelensky yet, citing a need for certain conditions to be created. As of today, August 9, 2025, Zelensky has not yet been formally invited to the Alaska summit, although a senior White House official told CBS News that planning is fluid and his involvement is still possible. It seems we'll just have to wait and see.
This summit didn't just appear out of thin air. What were the preceding developments that led us to this point? And how has President Trump's stance on Russia and the conflict evolved?
The wheels for this summit really started turning following a 3-hour meeting between Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Putin in Moscow on August 6, 2025. After that meeting, Trump indicated progress had been made, reports NPR. During this meeting, Putin reportedly provided, quote, concrete examples of the kinds of things that Russia would ask for in order to end the war. Interestingly, Trump's posture towards the conflict has recently shifted. While he initially resisted pressure on Putin, he has more recently threatened tougher sanctions against Moscow, including steep tariffs on India, a key buyer of Russian oil, according to NPR.
That's a significant shift. And did those sanctions materialize?
They did on India. As reported by news sources, President Trump imposed an additional 25% tariff on Indian goods, effective August 27, 2025, which is just 18 days from now. This brings the total tariff on many Indian imports to 50% due to India's continued purchase of Russian oil. Trump identified India as one of Moscow's, quote, economic enablers, according to The Guardian. Trump also set an August 8, 2025, deadline for Russia to agree to a ceasefire, threatening sweeping sanctions if it wasn't met. However, that threat was overshadowed by the announcement of the Alaska meeting yesterday, and no new additional sanctions on Russia were announced, despite the deadline passing without a ceasefire, as confirmed by news sources including BBC News. Trump has also expressed public frustration with Putin's continued missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian cities, The Guardian reports. Ultimately, Trump believes a resolution can only occur when he and Putin meet, stating, quote, I don't believe anything's going to happen until he and I get together, according to NPR.
Ethan, a territorial swap like this, if it were to proceed without Ukraine's full consent, has huge legal and geopolitical implications. Can you shed some light on the potential international fallout of such a deal?
This is where we navigate some incredibly choppy waters, Grace. A peace deal that would formalize the transfer of Ukrainian sovereign territory to Russia against the express will of Kyiv presents profound legal and geopolitical challenges. In September 2022, Russia formally annexed these regions, along with Donetsk and Luhansk, into the Russian Federation, following referendums widely condemned as illegal by the international community. This proposed territorial swap directly contradicts amendments made to the Russian Constitution in 2020 and 2022, which explicitly forbid the ceding of any territory once it has been declared part of the Russian Federation. Article 4 of their constitution affirms the integrity and inviolability of its territory, creating what some legal experts call a surrealist legal conundrum within Russia's own legal framework.
So it would be problematic internally for Russia and externally for international law.
Precisely. From the perspective of international law, such a deal would be highly problematic. The principle of territorial integrity, enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the United Nations Charter, mandates that states refrain from the threat or use of force against another state's territorial integrity. Any territorial swap without Ukraine's free and genuine consent would directly violate this fundamental principle. Most critically, international law strictly prohibits the acquisition of territory through the threat or use of force, a peremptory norm. Russia's annexations of Ukrainian territories are overwhelmingly regarded by the international community as illegal and invalid. So a, quote, territorial swap emerging from an ongoing invasion would be seen as an attempt to legitimize territory illegally acquired by force.
And what would be the broader geopolitical impact for the United States and its allies?
The geopolitical and strategic consequences for the United States, relationship with its European allies, particularly NATO members, and for the credibility of the U.S.-led international order would be severe. Such a deal would be perceived as a significant betrayal of Ukraine and a unilateral action by the United States, severely eroding trust among European allies and within NATO, who have consistently affirmed Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It would undermine NATO's core principles and could intensify calls within Europe for a more independent European security architecture and increased Trump-proofing of their aid and defense efforts. The credibility of the U.S. as a defender of democratic values and international norms would be severely diminished, potentially emboldening other revisionist powers and leading to increased global instability. It's a high-stakes gamble with global repercussions.
A truly complex and delicate situation, Ethan. Thank you for breaking it all down for us. Story 1 of 2.
My pleasure, Grace.
Welcome back. We're turning now to a significant economic shift, as a new round of sweeping reciprocal tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump has officially taken effect. This is already making waves across global trade, and for more on what this means for consumers and the economy, we turn to our reporter Chloe, who's been following this closely. Chloe, give us the rundown.
Grace, it's a tariff icy story, though perhaps not for consumers. As of 2 days ago, Thursday, August 7th, these new import taxes are largely in full swing, impacting dozens of countries and the European Union. According to reporting from the Capital Spectator and globalnews.ca, this move pushes the overall average effective U.S. tariff rate to over 17%, a level not seen since 1935. It is, quite simply, a monumental shift in global trade policy.
17% is a huge jump. What's the administration's justification for these new taxes, and what kind of revenue are they expecting?
Well, the Trump administration justifies these tariffs as a way to address what Washington calls unfair trade practices, penalizing nations allegedly taking unfair advantage of the U.S. In some cases, like with India, it is also linked to national security concerns regarding the purchase of Russian oil. As for revenue, President Trump has asserted that billions of dollars are now flowing into the U.S. As Yahoo Finance and globalnews.ca have uncovered, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick anticipates generating $50 billion a month in tariff revenue, while Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has suggested revenues could exceed $300 billion annually.
That's a lot of money, but it sounds like there are significant economic consequences. What are we looking at in terms of impact on consumers and businesses?
The forecast is pretty clear, Grace, and it is not looking rosy. Economists widely predict these tariffs will fuel inflation and lead to higher prices for consumers. Globalnews.ca estimates U.S. households could incur an extra cost of $2,000 to $2,400 in 2025 due to these price increases. For example, a 50% tariff on Brazilian coffee imports is expected to make your morning brew noticeably more expensive. And for car buyers, the average price for a new car could rise by approximately $3,500 due to tariffs on Japanese and European-made cars, plus existing tariffs on Canadian and Mexican vehicles.
So, our wallets are definitely feeling the squeeze. Beyond price tags, how are these tariffs affecting global trade and specific industries?
The ripple effects are already substantial. The World Trade Organization has already revised its projection for global merchandise trade growth in 2025 down to a paltry 0.9% due to these tariffs, anticipating further suppression in 2026. Globalnews.ca also notes that Brazil's gross domestic product could potentially be reduced by 0.6% to 1.0% if their 50% tariff becomes long-lasting. In terms of jobs, analysts estimate that tariffs could reduce U.S. payroll employment by nearly 500,000 jobs by year-end, with key industrial states facing particular hardship. The textile sector in Lesotho and Laos, for instance, has already reported job losses and canceled orders. Company-wise, Yahoo Finance reports Toyota Motor forecasts a nearly $9.5 billion to $10 billion hit from President Trump's car tariffs, leading it to slash its annual profit forecast.
This is certainly a complex web of economic impacts. Chloe, let's talk about the legal side of things, because I understand the legality of these tariffs is being challenged. Where do things stand?
This is a critical point, Grace, and it is a major factor in the instability of these tariffs. The administration is using the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, as its legal basis, declaring an economic emergency. However, as various news sources via Gemini Flash have reported, the U.S. Court of International Trade, a lower federal court, ruled in May 2025 that President Trump had exceeded his authority, deeming the tariffs invalid. Separately, a Washington, D.C. district court went even further, asserting that IEEPA does not authorize tariffs at all.
So despite these rulings, the tariffs are still in effect. How is that possible?
That is due to the appeals process, Grace. The Trump administration immediately appealed the trade court's decision to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. That court then granted an administrative stay on the lower court's injunction, which effectively pauses the lower court's order and allows the tariffs to continue being enforced and collected during the appeals process. Oral arguments before an 11-judge panel of the Federal Circuit were held on July 31, 2025, and judges expressed significant skepticism about the administration's interpretation of IEEPA, noting the statute does not explicitly mention tariffs. A final ruling is still pending, and it is widely anticipated this case will ultimately reach the U.S. Supreme Court, potentially making a landmark ruling on presidential power over trade policy.
That will certainly be a closely watched decision. Finally, Chloe, what about the ongoing situation with U.S.-China tariffs? I hear there is a deadline looming.
Yes, Grace, a big one. The U.S. and China face an August 12th deadline to extend their tariff pause, which is just 3 days from now. President Trump has been intensifying threats of higher duties, specifically citing China's purchase of Russian oil, which China's foreign ministry has defended as legitimate and lawful. If this tariff pause expires without an extension, the economic implications would be dire. Past tariffs have shown U.S. consumers bear the cost through higher prices. A lapse could see duties snap back to around 80% for the U.S. on Chinese goods, significantly increasing import costs. This could lead to a 1.8% drop in U.S. gross domestic product and a 1.1% increase in inflation over 2 to 3 years if tariffs escalate significantly, according to various news sources via Gemini Flash.
Chloe, thank you for breaking down what is undoubtedly a very complex and impactful situation. We appreciate you staying on top of it for us.
My pleasure, Grace.
And we will continue to follow all of these developments here on the program. Here are some other headlines. In Washington, a major diplomatic breakthrough. The leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan have initialed a historic peace agreement at a White House summit, ending decades of conflict. The deal, witnessed by President Donald Trump, establishes a, quote, peace roadmap to resolve the long-standing dispute over the Nagorno-Karabakh region. A key feature is a new transit corridor through Armenian territory, which will be named the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity. The United States is set to gain exclusive development rights to the route for 99 years. Both Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev credited President Trump's engagement for the success, with both leaders suggesting he be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. However, some Armenian diaspora groups have criticized the deal for not addressing the right of return for those displaced from Nagorno-Karabakh. Meanwhile, the world of artificial intelligence is getting a real intelligence boost. OpenAI has officially launched GPT-5, the highly anticipated successor to its revolutionary AI model. CEO Sam Altman describes using the new model as having a PhD-level expert on demand for any topic. GPT-5 promises a more unified system that can think more deeply on complex problems, with improved skills in coding, writing, and even answering health questions. One of its most talked about new features is vibe coding, where a user can simply describe an application and the error, "I will write the hundreds of lines of code to create it." The launch wasn't without a few bugs, however, with some embarrassing errors in presentation materials and a simple math mistake during a live demo, proving the system isn't quite infallible yet. In Brazil, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is cutting down a controversial bill. He has vetoed key provisions of legislation that environmentalists nicknamed the Devastation Bill. The vetoed articles would have allowed for fast-tracking environmental licenses for projects like mining and infrastructure, with a simple online self-declaration, posing a major threat to the Amazon rainforest and indigenous communities. Environmental groups are calling the move a victory, especially as Brazil prepares to host the UN climate talks. While Lula signed the main body of the bill, the vetoes block its most destructive elements, though the country's conservative Congress could still vote to override them. Down under, a strengthened alliance is making waves in response to Chinese naval operations. New Zealand and Australia are pursuing closer military cooperation after an unprecedented live-fire naval exercise by China in the Tasman Sea. New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, after meeting with his Australian counterpart, said the goal is to create one essential ANZAC force to operate in an increasingly unpredictable region. The move was prompted by a Chinese naval flotilla conducting drills much further south than usual, forcing commercial flights to be diverted without warning. This is pushing New Zealand to reconsider its potential role in the non-nuclear technology sharing part of the AUK-US Security Pact. And finally, it seems his tenure at the IRS wasn't very long. President Trump has removed Billy Long as Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service after less than 2 months on the job, marking the shortest tenure in the agency's history. The former Missouri congressman, who once sponsored legislation to abolish the IRS, has been appointed the new U.S. ambassador to Iceland. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will step in as acting commissioner. The sudden move follows reports of clashes and missteps by Long, with one top Democrat noting, "From the minute Trump announced Billy Long as his IRS pick, it was obvious this would end badly." That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.